All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College Application and Website Development, or AWD1111 Database-Driven Web Development class, I'm going through and creating a series of a series of video presentations based on the PDFs from Flavio Cope's The Valley of Code. The first three sets that I'm doing are meant to be review, and I'm going through Flavio's HTML handbook. I've already done that, and I've got 5 lessons that I've done on that. Then CSS handbook, which I'm in the middle of right now. Then I'm going to do the JavaScript handbook. This is all meant for review. Then we'll probably make 1 or 2 websites, just do those, and then I'm going to jump into, because that's all client side, well, then we'll jump into server side, and we'll go over his Node.js handbook and his React handbook. He used to have one for Express, but I think he's updating it right now, but I may have an old copy, and we'll see. So with that said, let me jump back in, and I'm on the CSS handbook, and I'm on page 43 of 175. We're talking about units. Now, the key thing to realize is when you're talking about units, are you talking about absolute units, or are you talking about variable units? All right. When we talk about points, PT, or pix, px, etc., those are absolute units. When we talk about m's and rems and percentages, those are not absolute units. So, it says here that pixels are the most widely used measurement unit. I have no reason to doubt Mr. Copes, but I would just say that I very rarely use pixels. I virtually always use rems. We're going to talk about rems in just a moment. A pixel does not actually correlate to a physical pixel on the screen. All right. Percentages. Another thing that you can use, as it says, are percentages. All right. So notice it's got here, parent has got a width of 400 pixels. That's an absolute size. Child has got a width of 50%, which is 50% of that, or 200 pixels. All right, real world measurement units. These are all ones that you can use. The ones that you'll see most often, that as far as I can tell, at least on that list, are points. All right. It says mostly useless on screen. They can be useful for printing style sheets. All right. I'm not going to worry that much about those. Again, I want to talk more about the relative units. And first you see m's and then you see rems. All right. M's is the value, as it says there, assigned to the element's font size. It does not change depending on the font used, just on the font size. Okay, and it's called M because it measures the width of the letter M. Rem is like M, but as it says, rather than varying on the current element, it varies on the root element font size. So whatever your root is set to. You set that font size once and then it's consistent. I like using rems. All right. There are also viewport units that you can use. So notice you've got VW for viewport width, VH for viewport height, Vmin for the minimum unit, and Vmax for the maximum unit. Now, the ones that I use most often in here, really the one I use is VH. As it says, it represents a percentage of the viewport height. So 50 VH means 50, take up 50% of the viewport height. There are fractional units, and as it says, they're used in grids, so they're going to talk about those much later on in this lesson. All right. Now, URL is used in here quite a bit for different things. So let's take a quick look at why this might be used or how this might be used. All right. So I'm going to grab this. And I'm going to go over to here. Let's see. I want to find something that's, I know what I want to do, but let's see. Let's go into here. And for our background, for our body at the top here, we've got all this stuff set. And I'm going to set here a background image. Now, I don't have a test.ping, so don't worry about that. All right, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to try to go look on images.google.com, and I'm going to type in sky. Let's see. I'm trying to find a fairly, this one should work. In fact, let's do this one because it'll probably stick out. So let's save, let's copy the image address. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say URL, and I'm just going to give it that image address. Pretty ugly address, but hopefully I did it correctly. I don't like the way that looks though, so let's see. Maybe it is right. All right. Yeah. Okay, I screwed up. Not the first time, won't be the last. Let's jump back up here. And we're going to say background, image, image, and I'm going to say URL, and I'm just going to call this /images/sky.png. Okay. Don't worry, I don't have a sky.png. I'm going to get it right now. So I'm going to right mouse click on this, save my image into my images folder. And I guess it's a JPEG, but I'll save it as a sky.png anyway. All right, so now I've got that. Now let's look here, see if we changed anything. And you can see this. Now, it's ugly as heck because by default, it puts it on the screen as many times as it possibly can. Okay? Now, if I don't like that, there's different ways that I can set this. So let's look. And I'm probably going to bold this up, but I'm going to do the best I can here. So let's go back to here. And I'm going to say repeat. I don't know if I put it in here. Repeat. There's a repeat X, there's a repeat Y, and there's a repeat none. All right. So let's let W3 Schools find this for us. So W3 Schools, background image. And you can see there it is. Here's, oh, it's background repeat. All right, so let's try that. Look one more time. So background, repeat, and we're going to say here, repeat X. Just I want you to see the difference between these. So there's X, and you'll notice the difference. It's only on the X-axis. Repeat Y should only repeat it on the Y-axis. So let's try that. Okay. If I say repeat, no repeat, it should only be in there once. And it's pretty obvious, I think, what's going on. Now, there's other things that you can do too. For instance, there is a cover. So they're setting a height, a position, a no repeat. And here we're going to try just this background size cover to see if we can get this to cover the entire background. All right. And you can see what happens once we've done that. Okay, that's most of the stuff that you probably have to be familiar with as far as working with the URL and with the background stuff. All right. Calc, as it says, you can use math operations if you want. I'm not going to run through that. I think we can all do math. Backgrounds, I just went over a lot of that with you. Again, what I did wasn't perfect, but it at least gets you started, I would think. Comments we've looked at already. Remember when you put comments in a CSS file, it's like when you put comments in a C# file, multi-line comments. All right, you can't use the // that isn't acceptable here. But whether it's a single line comment or a multi-line comment, it starts with the /* and it ends with the //. All right. As it says, in the last few years, talking here about custom properties, in the last few years, CSS preprocessors have had a lot of success. It was very common to start with less or with Sass, and it's still used. The main benefits, what they're talking about doing here is to basically create the equivalent of CSS variables. And as it says, they allow you to nest selectors, they provide an easy import functionality, and they give you variables. Now, there's the key thing. CSS is not a programming language, meaning that it's very limited in what it can do. As it says there, it's mainly a declarative syntax to tell browsers how to display a web page. That said, a variable is a variable, okay? A name that refers to a value. And as it says, it can help reduce repetition and inconsistencies in your CSS. What does that mean? That means if you are constantly including the same thing all over and over again, it would be nice. It's almost like creating a constant where you create it once and then use it as you need it. It's the same type of an idea. So as it says here, a CSS variable is defined using a special syntax. You prepend 2 dashes to a name. So you can see what they've done here. And as it says, they'll talk more about the colon root later on. Okay, then you can access the variable using the var, like this. So again, what we're talking about here and getting toward is being able to create the equivalent of variables and then being able to use them throughout the document. Okay. As mentioned here, you can create variables inside of any element. They give you some examples. Now, I'm not going to show you much on it because I don't use these very much. I've done a little bit of work with Sass, but it's been a while. Adding variables to a selector makes them available to any and all children. The colon root, as it says, is a pseudo class that identifies the root element or top element of the tree. Interacting with a CSS value using JavaScript. As mentioned here, it says the cool thing about this is that you can now play with them using JavaScript. I'm not going to say any more about it because we're going to hit on JavaScript soon. All right. If a variable is assigned a property that does not accept the value, it's considered invalid. All right. Now, browser support is considered very good for CSS variables according to Can I Use. We have talked about Can I Use in the past, but if I go into caniuse.com and I come in here and put in CSS variables and hit enter, it shows me, you can see that most of this in here is green. All right. The stuff that's red means it's not supported. But with what you can see with what's green here, which looks like about 2/3 to 3/4, that means there is support. CSS variables are case sensitive. You can do some math within them. You can use them in media queries. All right. You can set fallback values, and I'm just going to stop there because I don't want to give you anything that's incorrect right there. All right. If we have time, maybe we'll look at those in class. I don't know. Fonts, we've talked about. I've already shown you some stuff with font family. Font weight is typically used for bolding. Font stretch I've never used. Font styles we can use, and we'll look at that in a minute, and I've already shown you font size. So font family, remember the way that this works is that typically the last thing that you'll put if you've got a font family is going to be either serif or sans serif. All right? So for instance, if we had a font family here, this is Helvetica, but we don't know what it's going to do if it doesn't find Helvetica. Here it's Helvetica, and if you can't find it, use Arial. Well, what happens when you don't have that? All right. So it says serif, sans serif, and monospace. The most popular serif fonts are shown here. Times New Roman is probably the best known. The most popular sans serif font is Arial and Helvetica, and then there's monospace. So you'll often see stuff like this. This shouldn't be anything new to you, and I realize I'm going through this fairly quickly, but as I said, this should make sense to you. All right, so this says the default font that we want to set here is going to be Helvetica. If for some reason the user doesn't have Helvetica, she or he should use Arial. If for some reason the user doesn't have Helvetica or Arial, they should use whatever the default sans serif font is. And virtually every computer has a built-in serif and a sans serif font. And if I come in here, do this one time quickly, and say difference between serif and sans serif, all right, and we look at this, they will show you the serif fonts. It's not a great one. Let's see if we can find something better. You can see when you look at this how these things are shown. All right, and it's they have the little curly on the ends. All right. They're also known as tails or feet. Those are serif fonts there. The ones that don't are sans serif, sans meaning without. All right. Font weight. There's different ways that you can set this. If you set the font weight to bold, which is the one I use most often, it's going to get the default bold, which is usually about 400. But you can also use font weight, and you can use numbers for the amount of boldness. So this is the lightest bold, or the lightest font. That's the boldest bold. Font stretch, as it says, allows you to choose a narrow or wide face for the font if one is available. I've never used it. Font style, the key things you're going to put in there, as it says, are going to be italic or oblique. It says there is very little, if any, difference between italic and oblique. Font size, we've already talked about. And again, you can pass in two kinds of values here. You'll notice that the first type is a length, which can be pixels, rems, ems, etc., and percentages, or there are predefined keywords. There's XX small, X small, small, medium large, X large, XX large, etc. And again, the one I typically use is small, and I usually put that inside of a footer. So if I come through here and go back to what I've been working on here, And let's just go, we'll just use this on the main page here. And we'll go down to the bottom. And down on the very bottom here, I'm going to put in a footer. And it'll say something like, created by Jeff Scott, ampersand copy, 2022, all rights reserved. Okay, and I save that. And I like to, typically I'll even put that into a paragraph tag. You don't have to. But I like to do that. So, all right, so we've got that. Now when I go back and look at this, okay, I don't know where it is. Maybe I don't have it up anymore. So let's open it with Live Server. And if I go down to the bottom here, there it is. And you'll notice since it's a paragraph, I still have that large C. All right, well, why am I telling you that? Because I'm going to come in here and I'm going to use the footer and go into here. And typically, again, I like to put this down at the bottom. It is the footer. So footer, and I'll say font size small. And you should notice when I look at this, all right, didn't really look like it got any smaller, but let's look. Size small. Save. Does not look any smaller. There you go. Now that's still big, but notice the rest of it, how small it got. All right. Okie dokie. Font variant, as it says, it's used to change the text to small caps. If you want to do that, there's also other ways. There's a text transform, etc. I'm not going to go through that now. You can combine font properties in one. So here we're combining the size and the type. If you're going to use that, you want to do something like this. Loading custom fonts using font face, I don't use that very often. Rather, what I end up using in that case is I usually go out to Google Fonts, and I talked about that earlier. All right. Again, there's other things with typography. Text transform, I've shown you text decoration already when we remove the underlines. I showed you text align when we centered that. Text transform can be used. You know, and there's a bunch of other ones here. Text transform, uppercase, a lot of times you see people do that. So if I go back and show you this very quickly, if we go back here, notice that this is lowercase. All right. But if I come back here and I go back to my nav, and I think it'll be the LIA. Could be just the LI, but let's try it with the LIA. And I'm going to say text transform, and I'm going to say here uppercase. File save, and let's see if now this is an uppercase. And you see that it is. Okay. Quite often that's how that's used. I don't know if it's used a lot in other ways other than that, but that's how typically I would use it. All right, the text decoration I've shown you already. None means remove it. You can literally force an underline. The blink, I don't know if that's still supported anymore. All right. Text align, again, we've talked about already. Vertical alignment, as it says, it determines how inline elements are vertically aligned. And there are different ways that you can do this. Typically, where that becomes important is if you've got text that you're trying to align with an image. All right, line height. Let's look at that one. So let's go to our paragraph in here, first of all, let's look at this. So you can see what the paragraphs look like. In fact, we'll look at these two paragraphs here. You notice how close they are, etc. All right. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say that for my paragraphs, let's give them a line height. Let's make them 1.4. You don't put anything else in there for rem or whatever. And I'm going to do a file save and now take a look at it. And what you should notice is there's more space in here. All right, so there's other ways that can be used as well, but that's probably, again, I'm trying to just go over some of the things that are used most often, how they're used. There's an indent if you want to do indentation. There's a word spacing for the amount of spacing between each word. So let's try this one. There's 2 pixels in here. Again, I don't typically use pixels, but we'll use this one anyway. Now there's more space between each word, between each letter, I should say. Actually, I think it's between each word. All right. Yeah, the next one's letter spacing, so we could do the same thing. So we could come in here and do letter spacing if we were so inclined. Let's make it pretty big, so we'll make it 1/2 pixel. And now you're seeing there's more space between each letter. Okay, all right. Text shadow, when you set up a shadow, notice what it says here. You've got an X offset, a Y offset, and a blur radius. All right. These can both be yellow, or both be 0 rather. And then you typically will put a color in there. So let's grab that. And let's put some of that around our, see if we can do it at least, around our around our H1 tag. So right now our H1 is up here. So you can see what it looks like. So we're going to see if we can add some shadow to it. There was the H1. Okay. You can immediately tell when you look at this, there it is. Now black and yellow don't look particularly nice, but again, you get the idea. Typically that's done for the aesthetic effect that it has. All right, you can set a lot. There's a lot of different things in here. I mean, most of these I'm not even going to talk about. Direction is almost always RTL because in this country we read from right to left. In some countries, of course, they read left. We go from left to right. Some countries go from right to left. All right. All right, this is a nice place to stop here talking about the box model. So I'll pick it up there in our next discussion.